I've mastered the art of walking away from the train wreck confidently.
He doesn't fake laughs. He doesn't play nice. When Eddie Murphy doesn't respect you, you feel it. And once he says your name, he means it. No punchlines, no backpedaling.
It has to be perfect because I don't want to do anything else that sucks ever again.
He's not the loudest voice in the room, but he's the sharpest. And if Eddie Murphy calls you out, it sticks. Because when Eddie calls you corny, your whole act starts sounding different. Audiences stop laughing. Doors start closing. Delirious, Raw, Saturday Night Live, The Nutty Professor. Eddie didn't just change comedy, he made it personal. He knew what was funny. He knew what was fake. And when someone tried to ride his wave, he cut the mic. No warnings, no fake smiles. He doesn't explode, he doesn't rant. He just drops one line, and it echoes for decades.
There's not one line that they do. People come and say strange stuff.
He's worked with giants, but a few he wanted nothing to do with. No collaborations, no respect, no second chances. They weren't just unfunny, they were forgettable. Here are the 6 comedians Eddie Murphy never liked, on or off the mic, and why every one of them got shut out, for good. Number 1. David Spade. Some comedians cross a line. David Spade never came back from it. It happened fast. One joke, one moment. But it hit Eddie different, because this wasn't some random comic taking a shot. It was SNL, his old home. And it wasn't just any joke, it was aimed straight at the heart of Eddie's legacy. In the mid-90s, Spade was hosting the Hollywood Minute segment on Saturday Night Live. Holding a photo of Eddie Murphy, Spade said, "Look kids, a falling star." The audience laughed, but Eddie didn't. That wasn't shade, it was a public undercut. At the time, Eddie's movies weren't hitting like they used to, but coming from SNL, from a guy who got famous standing where Eddie once stood, that was personal.
Look, children, it's a falling star. Make a wish. Yes.
Later, in interviews, Eddie didn't hold back. He called the joke mean-spirited, said it stung more because it came from inside the house, the place where he built the walls. He reportedly told Lorne Michaels he wouldn't return to the show while Spade was still on it, and for decades, he didn't. This wasn't a celebrity spat, this was something deeper. Eddie saw it as betrayal. Not just a punchline, but a public dismissal of everything he'd earned. The kid who once was SNL had become the butt of the joke. Years passed, careers shifted, but Eddie never forgot. At one point, Spade tried to downplay it, said it was just comedy, that he was doing what the segment always did, taking shots. But Eddie made one thing clear in interviews. There's a difference between a joke and a jab. That wasn't comedy, that was weak. And that line stayed, quiet but permanent, because Eddie never dragged Spade through headlines. He didn't make a campaign out of it, he just erased him. No collaborations, no invites, no shout-outs, just silence. And that silence said everything. Eddie never needed revenge, he just needed distance. That was his response, pulling back the respect, closing the door, and making sure it stayed shut. The real punchline: David Spade kept working. He stayed in the game, but he never shared a frame with Eddie again. No sketches, no films, not even a handshake on screen. Because in Eddie's world, when someone shows their true colors, there's no second bit. "I built that house," Eddie once said, referring to SNL. "They don't get to tear it down while I'm watching." There's no war between them, but there's no warmth either. What started as a 5-second joke turned into a decades-long chill, and Eddie never looked back. Number 2. Bill Cosby. This one wasn't about a joke, it was about judgment. Long before Cosby's legacy collapsed, tension was already in the air, and it didn't start on stage. It started behind the scenes. In the 1980s, Eddie was untouchable. Packed arenas, blockbusters, comedy albums going platinum. But with success came critics, and Cosby became one of the loudest. He didn't call to congratulate Eddie, he called to scold him. About language, about content, about setting a better example. Eddie listened, but he didn't forget. "He said I was too dirty," Eddie once recalled, "like he was my dad or something." To Eddie, it wasn't advice, it was control. A comedian from another era trying to reshape him into something he never asked to be. So Eddie answered the only way he knew how, on stage. In Raw, Eddie turned that private call into a public clinic. He mimicked Cosby's voice, stumbling through mock outrage. The audience roared, and just like that, the power shifted.
You cannot say filth, flarn, filth in front of people.
Then came the twist. Richard Pryor. When Eddie told him about the call, Pryor gave a one-line response that became legend. "Tell Bill to have a Coke and shut up." That wasn't just a joke, it was a line in the sand. Pryor stood with Eddie, and Eddie never forgot that either. Cosby, meanwhile, kept throwing shade. In interviews, he'd talk about comedians lowering the bar. He didn't name Eddie, but he didn't need to. Eddie stayed silent. For decades. Then came the 2015 Mark Twain Prize ceremony. Eddie stepped on stage and, for the first time in years, said Cosby's name. "You know, I would love to talk about Bill, but I'd probably get sued or drugged." The room exploded, but Eddie, deadpan, no smile, no follow-up. That's what made it sting. It wasn't loud, it was surgical. A single line after years of silence. Eddie never needed a feud. He didn't need to fight back. He just waited. And when the mask finally fell, he let the truth speak louder than he ever could. There was no friendship, just two generations of comedy, walking in different directions. Eddie wasn't chasing Cosby's legacy, he was building his own. And now, no one confuses the two. Number 3, Howard Stern. Some feuds explode in headlines, this one simmered in silence. By the early 2000s, Eddie Murphy had already pulled back. No stand-up, no late-night circuits, just films, family, and peace. But the noise still came looking, and it had a name, Howard Stern. Stern had mocked celebrities for years, but with Eddie it felt personal. He joked about Eddie's career, his choices, even his family. And Eddie? Nothing. No reactions, no press jabs, just silence. For over a decade, Stern kept going. Eddie stayed distant. Then came 2019. Howard Stern released a new book, a rebrand, a softer version of himself. He apologized to dozens of people he'd dragged over the years, but Eddie's name, missing. That silence spoke volumes. So Eddie finally answered. During a rare interview, someone brought up Stern. Eddie's tone didn't change, but his words did. "He used to go after me hard, real personal. I never said anything, but I saw it. No anger, just calm clarity." The host asked if Eddie accepted Stern's attempt at a public reset. He paused, then said, "You don't have to say sorry if you were never sorry." That line landed with weight. It wasn't a clapback. It was a reminder. Memory matters. Eddie had heard it all. The jokes, the shade, the smirks. He'd stayed quiet to keep it from growing. But silence for Eddie never meant forgiveness. Later, Stern mentioned Eddie briefly, said he respected him, didn't mean harm. But Eddie never responded, because he didn't need to. "I don't hold grudges," Eddie said once, "but I do keep notes." That sentence explains everything. It wasn't about ego, it wasn't about payback, it was about respect. And when that line was crossed, Eddie didn't raise his voice. He just left the room and never came back. No drama, no feud. Just two men walking different paths, and one of them never looking back. Eddie didn't slam the door on Howard Stern, he just kept it closed. Number 4, Richard Pryor. This wasn't hate, this was something harder. When Eddie Murphy first stepped on stage, he wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing a ghost. Richard Pryor wasn't just the king of comedy, he was the blueprint, the voice, the rhythm, the truth. And Eddie studied it all. "I used to watch his albums over and over," Eddie once said. "He was everything." But admiration has a sharp edge. As Eddie's star rose, the comparisons came fast. Some called him the next Pryor. Some said he was carrying the torch. Others said he was copying. And Pryor, he didn't like it. According to Paul Mooney, Pryor's longtime friend and writer, there was real tension. Mooney claimed Pryor didn't respect Eddie's comedy, said he was too Hollywood, doing characters, not truth. Whether it was ego, resentment, or something unspoken, the energy changed.
And it was crazy. I mean, it kept me up 24 hours.
Eddie never clapped back, but he didn't hide from it either. Sometimes your heroes don't want to share the stage with you. That's just how it goes. Even through that quiet distance, Eddie kept showing respect. He called Pryor the greatest. He never denied the influence, but there was always that space. Never too close, never too far. And then came the turning point. In 1998, Richard Pryor won the first ever Mark Twain Prize for American Humor. Eddie was invited to speak. He declined. No explanation, no headlines, just absence. That silence said everything. Years later, when Eddie won his Mark Twain Prize, he brought up Pryor, but carefully. There's only one Richard. I was lucky to walk behind him, even if he never reached back. That wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. Eddie had carried that weight for years, the tension of being inspired and shut out. But he never tried to outshine Pryor. He just stopped waiting for the nod. Because that's how Eddie moves, not with arguments, with exits. He left the shadow, found his own light, and kept it moving. There was never a war, just two icons standing close on opposite sides of silence. Number 5. Paul Mooney. Some rivalries burn slow. This one snapped from the start. Paul Mooney was a legend in comedy circles. Sharp, unfiltered, and never afraid to name names. He wrote for Richard Pryor, lived in the shadows of greatness, and made his own rules. But when it came to Eddie Murphy, the respect was never mutual. It started with Pryor. Mooney always protected that name like a legacy. So when Eddie rose up and people started calling him the next Pryor, Mooney didn't just disagree, he took offense. In interview after interview, Mooney threw subtle jabs at Eddie. Sometimes it was about his style, sometimes it was about his image, but it always felt personal. Eddie was funny, Hollywood funny, Mooney once said, but Pryor was real. That line echoed through the comedy world, because in Mooney's eyes, Eddie wasn't raw, he was polished, big budget, safe. But Eddie didn't fire back, not at first. He let the comments stack up, the comparisons, the interviews, the little digs buried in stand-up routines. And then years later, when Mooney got bolder, Eddie answered. In a rare behind-the-scenes moment, Eddie was asked if he respected Paul Mooney's legacy. He gave a long pause, then said, "He made people laugh. Just not me." That was it. A single sentence. Flat, cold, dismissive. Eddie didn't need to match Mooney's energy. He didn't need to debate talent or legacy. He just made it clear. They were never in the same lane.
Well, no, I've never had it. I've never had it. That's since I was 7.
But Mooney didn't stop. In later years, he began implying Eddie had borrowed parts of his act, without credit. Claimed Eddie had taken rhythms, phrases, even punchlines. There was no proof, just friction. And Eddie? He never gave it oxygen. He didn't argue. He didn't clap back. He just went on winning. "You don't have to respond to everyone," Eddie once said, especially when the audience already answered. That line said it all. Mooney had his stage, but Eddie had the world. The truth? Eddie never wanted beef with Paul Mooney, but he also never forgot the shade. And once that line was crossed, Eddie did what he always does. He shut the door quietly. There's no record of them ever working together. No photo, no quote, no mutual praise, just two men, standing on different sides of the legacy, with no plans to cross over. Number 6. Cat Williams. Cat Williams doesn't pull punches. He swings wild, and in comedy, that makes enemies fast. But when he started coming for Eddie Murphy, that wasn't just bold, it was calculated. Over the years, Cat Williams made his name on being fearless, calling out Hollywood, roasting big names, questioning legends. But somewhere in that chaos, Eddie became a target. The first shot came subtle. During a stand-up set, Cat mentioned comedians who used to be funny, then dropped Eddie's name right after. Laughter, applause. But the line was clear. Eddie didn't flinch, didn't mention it. But Cat wasn't finished. In a radio interview years later, Cat doubled down, questioning why Eddie hadn't returned to stand-up, calling his films safe, and saying he didn't consider Eddie top 5 anymore. He was the king back then, Cat said, but comedy moved on. That line traveled fast, headlines picked it up, social media ran with it. Still, Eddie stayed quiet. No tweets, no interviews, no response. But silence isn't surrender. In fact, when Eddie did speak, it was brief and surgical. When asked whether he'd seen Cat's comments, Eddie just laughed, then said, "Everybody's got a mic now, doesn't mean they're saying something." That's how Eddie plays it. He doesn't match noise, he waits it out, then ends it in one sentence.
Play it again, I said. Just say that's my shit.
But Cat kept going. At one point, he joked that Eddie's legacy was more family movies than fire stand-up. Another time, he implied that Eddie had lost his edge because he got too comfortable. It was consistent, and it was loud. But Eddie, still calm, still unmoved. "When you've already been at the top," Eddie once said, "you don't chase people trying to climb." That response said everything. Eddie wasn't dismissing Cat's talent. He was rejecting the idea that his legacy needed defending. Because the truth is, Eddie already proved himself. On stage, on film, in silence. Cat may be louder. He may be sharper in the moment. But Eddie's not in the moment anymore. He is the moment people still measure against. And that's what stings. No public beef, no direct battle, just one man swinging, and the other never even stepping into the ring. Eddie Murphy never raised his voice. He didn't clap back. He didn't chase headlines. He just watched and remembered who said what. Some comedians earn their silence, but these 6, they earned the exit. One line, one look, one moment, and Eddie never circled back. Because once the trust cracked, the laughs stopped. And once the laughs stopped, you weren't just off the stage, you were erased from the story. So who do you think almost made this list, but slipped through, or should have? Drop it in the comments. And if you want deeper cuts, early episodes, and unfiltered stories that don't make it to the mainstream, subscribe and join the vault. It's built for real ones only. Because in Eddie Murphy's world, it wasn't about who got the spotlight. It was who never earned a second scene.